It only takes a little historical perspective to see that America has been here before, engaging in the same battle over voting rights more than 50 years ago. Our Nayyera Haq has a breakdown of this history.
We should be ashamed as a nation that 56 years later we have less voting rights than we had on August 6, 1965.
It is the most pernicious thing. This makes Jim Crow look like Jim Eagle.
What is old is new again. Democrats and activists are sounding the alarm about protecting voting rights, a fight many thought was over in 1965 with the passage of the Voting Rights Act. The Jim Crow laws coming out of the Civil War found ways to take the 15th Amendment and twist it against black people. Technically, black people had the right to vote, but in practice, local officials stopped black votes from getting to the ballot. They got creative, making black people take impossible tests like the infamous guess the number of beans in a jar before voting. And then they were simply brutal, beating black people who demanded to be treated equally. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 created a federal pre-clearance system. Counties with a history of racism were not allowed to make any changes to polling locations or access to voting without pre-clearing it with the federal government, specifically the Department of Justice, the same federal government that forced desegregation of schools in the South. Back then, the federal government was the ally of black voters in upholding the spirit of the law. Under Chief Justice John Roberts, the Supreme Court struck down the Voting Rights Act in 2013, saying, "Our country has changed. While any racial discrimination in voting is too much, Congress must ensure that the legislation it passes to remedy that problem speaks to current conditions." No more federal preclearance. States' rights, the argument of the Civil War, won out. And local officials, once again, have control over who gets to vote and when. More than 19 states have passed restrictive voting laws with no federal check on political and racist impulses. Today, it is perfectly legal in places like Shelby County, Memphis, Tennessee, to have only one polling place for nearly 80,000 black voters. In Georgia, as the young and black voter population increased by 2 million people, 10% of polling locations were closed in response. This is why people are forced to wait 8 to 9 hours in line to vote, and this is why black people do it anyway, because the power of the black vote will not be broken by Jim Eagle.
Wow.
Yeah. When you hear it that way, it's embarrassing, it's sad, it makes you mad that here we are, we're in 2022, and the Voting Rights Act 1965 lost ground in 2013, and we are still here. And one thing that's different, just as Robert said, our nation has changed, our nation has not changed. It's not. It's just gotten worse, to be honest with you. They always find a way to move the goalposts when it comes to black and brown people, especially when it comes to the filibuster. If you think about the history of the filibuster, as President Obama called it, it's a relic of Jim Crow. And it is used to stop the advancement of black people a number of times. If you look at the history of the filibuster here, the irony is the 15th Amendment, when you're talking about parties and overcoming the filibuster or whatever, they didn't have to use the filibuster because they used a simple majority in order to do that. At that time, the Republicans were in charge to pass voting rights for the 15th Amendment. And then obviously you saw the Jim Crow laws that stopped us from doing it with the voter tax and the things that our ancestors had to go through. And here we are in 2022, still fighting for a basic fundamental of being an American citizen in this country as a black or brown person, to have the right to vote. And yes, they'll say you got the right to vote, but if you're making it harder for a black or brown person compared to other citizens in this country, then you are doing black and brown people a disservice, and you are suppressing the vote. You don't want to see it, you refuse to see it, you know it's happening, but you just feel like you can use some of these rules that are relics and some of these Jim Crow type rules to get away with it. How can we stop it? once again, continue to vote, continue to put pressure on these lawmakers to make things pass. So it's sad. It is sad, Naja, and it really just gets me upset. And sometimes I just run out of words to say because I really want to scream sometimes. But instead of screaming, I got to build up my faith. I got to build up my strength in order to fight back against it.
Yeah, Mike, the stakes have never been higher, and we're truly seeing history repeat itself. I mean, we're talking about 19 states enacting 34 laws restricting voting access, and some of these laws are truly a full-fledged assault on our voting rights. And I'm talking to you, Arkansas, Florida, Kansas, Texas, Arizona, Tennessee, right? The list goes on. Republican legislators used Trump's baseless claims of voter fraud, and they have really used that as fuel to continue to suppress our vote by creating suppressive bills. I mean, I'm talking about the restrictions on ballot drop boxes, the limits, Mike, on how many absentee ballots a person can deliver to family members and non-family members. True voter intimidation we're seeing. The laws don't even allow a good person the opportunity to offer a drink of water to an older man or woman who's been in line for hours who wants to exercise their right to vote. I mean, that should just be disturbing to anyone and everyone. But Mike, the Democrats have got to step up here. This is a defining moment, and a moment that will really impact not just us, but the trajectory of our children's lives. So if this isn't, you know, if you're complacent for yourself, we can't be complacent for our children.
And, you know, and I don't want to, you know, put a big, you know, spread the whole thing over the whole Democratic Party, because the majority of the Democratic Party, 96% of the Democratic Party, they're doing the right thing. The lawmakers are doing the right thing. They're trying to do their best to make sure that they pass laws, to make sure that people who look like me and you have the right or the same access, I should say, to voting as the counterparts of the people that don't look like us. And it just takes me back sometimes. It takes me back to what I used to always fight against when it came to maybe some of my black friends out there who used to always say, well, why am I voting? My vote doesn't count. And I used to say, yes, it does. If it didn't count, they wouldn't be trying so hard to suppress it. Now they're doing it. Now it's getting to the point where it seems like every time we make some advancements, they move the goalposts in some kind of way, one form or fashion or another. And now I am afraid. And I'm not even talking about the long lines, Naja. And yes, that's embarrassing once again, that anybody has to stand in line for 8 or 9 hours just to have the right, just to go in there and put their vote in for a candidate or for a measure that's affecting their community or whatnot. That is an embarrassment. In fact, that you can't use or get food and water in order for you to sustain your energy while you stand in those long lines, sometimes in very cold and inclement weather. But the biggest issue that I'm having are in some of these states where you talk about where you can actually go and vote in certain counties, and then you can have a state legislator that's run by a different party basically say, we don't like that county. We don't like the outcome of that. And just do away with it and wipe away where your vote actually does not count.
Yeah, the gerrymandering.
Think about that. Think about that. No, think about the rules. Not just the gerrymandering, just the rules where it's like we don't like what's happening in Fulton County. So because we see some abnormalities here, we're just gonna wipe away all your votes there. Come on, man. Is that right? Is that democracy? No, it's not. It's got to be stopped, and it's got to be pressure put on Joe Manchin, Kirsten Sinema. Once again, the majority of Democrats are doing the right thing. Put the pressure where it belongs, all on them. Everybody put the spotlight on them to ensure that we get what we need to get done in order for us to have the equal chance of voting in this nation. Once again, the simple democracy, the simple right of democracy we have in this country. I mean,
you say 90% of Democrats are doing the right thing. I think they could do so much more. When you were thinking of, when you mentioned that, I thought about, you know, the passing of Desmond Tutu, and one of his most famous quotes, and I'm paraphrasing basically, inaction is siding with the oppressor. And so I want to see Democrats do so much more. I want them to put their fists down, draw the line in the sand, as we've seen the GOP do so many times, and really implore everything that they can to do something about these oppressive laws. So,
but that's what I'm talking about, though. Like the 90, I'm saying 90. When you talk about the Senate, You got 50 senators right now, and 48 of them are doing the right thing. So that's 96% of the senators are doing the right thing. There are 2 senators that right now, even if they're voting, we're talking about, you heard Clyburn talking about it, we're talking about the law, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act that Manchin actually endorses, that pushed through, that wants, but because of the filibuster. And obviously the Republicans have done this before. We're not talking about getting rid of the filibuster, period. We're talking about making some carve-outs for this, once again, this really important matter in our nation when it comes to our democracy. We need a carve-out for the filibuster for this, something that's been done by Republicans before. As a matter of fact, McConnell, who we'll talk about a little bit later, you just saw McConnell talking about, we're going to talk about how he feels about Joe Biden talking about that. Did the same thing when it came to a Supreme Court justice, I believe in 2016. So it's been done before. It has to be done for this situation right here. Once again, the basic principle of our democracy in order for us to have the equal chance to vote in our elections.
Yeah.
It's got to stop.
And just one more thing. Hey, look, I'm not a fan of the filibuster. I say blow it up. I mentioned this yesterday. I am a fan of the nuclear option, and I think the filibuster has been weaponized. It's it was intended to be something good, and it's just taken a wrong turn, and I think it's time to just reassess the whole thing.
Yeah, weaponized against us for the most part. That's what it's been used. That's why they call it a relic of Jim Crow.